Welcome everyone. Wow, this program is really growing. This is like phenomenal to see everyone. Each person that logged in was like my heart opened a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit, and then opened over here. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, it's fun to see a couple of new faces, Murali and Madhurani and Asha. I know your faces,
Yeah.
but it's exciting to see you in this Thursday session.
Yeah.
And
Asha.
Kara
Oh,
is
Kara.
in our meditation level 1 teacher training right now, and she did her yoga teacher training at Konalani. So this is her
Hmm.
first Sangha program. Thanks for coming, Kara.
Yeah. Welcome.
It's great to see you. You get the official welcome from
Yeah.
Dharma.
Well, this class sort of marks for me the beginning. Hey Tara, the beginning of sort of, like we're so used to going like yoga classes, like that's a normal thing, going to a yoga class. But I gotta say, going to a philosophy class is starting to become a normal thing, and it's a big deal. I think I'm just so grateful that all of you have like put in the time and works through the resistance that is natural when it comes to like giving birth to a new program like this. And wow, people just keep signing in.
And
Exciting.
if you can think back to your first yoga class,
Ah,
it was
yes.
probably a little uncomfortable, right? There were
Yeah.
probably some things where you're like, oh, am I doing it right? And is it
Mm-hmm.
supposed to feel like this? But you hung in there. So for those of you that are already comfortable with philosophy, that's great. But if this is a newer class for you, just have that patience and that compassion that you had for yourself when you started trying anything new. But yoga is a great example.
All right. Well, we're going to get started with a little bit of centering as always, and then we'll jump into the text and get the discussion started. Everyone looks like they've already found their seat, but just go ahead and let yourself sway a little bit in your seat and try to feel. People always sort of look past this little cue to sway. They're like, oh, I got it. I know how to sit still. But try to let that movement happen, smooth motion, kind of Paul Reps style. Paul Reps, the dear friend of our teacher, where he said, smooth motion cures commotion, and try to move your spine in such a way that it actually calms your mind. I like to visualize myself like in a warm pool of water that sort of has a little current to it, and it just sort of pushes you around. And simultaneously, it supports you, it lifts you up, it's buoyant. So ideally, the seat that we use to open the heart is buoyant and has the ability to sort of move and float, not too rigid. And then just imagine like that current slows down little by little, and instead of sitting still, you just you just stop moving. And then the breath arrives. And allow yourself to experience that moment of stillness within the movement of the breath. At the bottom of your exhale, and try to feel that breath moving just like that pool of water, natural, flowing. and then finishing the experience with a slight smile, and it's always just for you. And as they talk about in the text, it says, our effort can never be artificial. It should always come from the heart. And try to feel that slight smile, not as wax lips, but rather as like a little opening of the flower bud of the heart, just like a little peeking open. And then from there you can just allow the eyes to open. Well, welcome again, everyone. Just to look a little bit at the text we've been studying for the last 3 sessions, I think. Sutra 3.6 has been heavily discussed text. We often get through just a paragraph, and everyone's so inspired that we've worked with it for a while. And so just to remember, back to the actual sutra, in case you had forgotten it, it was really about how, well, there it is at the bottom of the screen. Yes.
And I just want to make sure everybody knows how to pin our box. It's fun to see everyone, but if you don't have your own copy of the text,
Yes.
you might need to zoom in. So if you hover over our square, 3 dots will show up, and then you'll just hit pin, and then hopefully that will make the text a little easier to read.
And then when we are discussing, you can just go back to gallery view, and you can see everybody, and it feels like we're just one big family. All right. So
we are.
Feels just like it because we are. These powers are brought into existence when a yogi's consciousness is covered by the energy of illusion, Maya. In the previous sutra, it talked about powers, and there was this like caveat throughout the whole sutra where it was like telling us all about powers, only to say at the end of the sutra, don't cash in your chips for powers. Keep practicing, and you'll arrive at a much better state. And so like the last sutra, we were like talking about it, and then at the end it was like, boom, told us those powers are not the goal, even though we just talked about it for a whole sutra. And so it says those powers are brought into existence, the ones we talked about in the last sutra, when you're confused, when you're actually caught in illusion. You want to add anything to that?
Oh, just Roseanne raised her hand.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Roseanne.
Okay. Not on purpose. Okay,
that
that's
was
okay.
Just saying,
that's cool. I don't even know how to do that.
Like,
so.
Amen. Cool. I bet I can click that off. I'm going to lower your hand.
Okay.
All right, cool. So
can
that's
relax.
sort of where it started. And I wanted to just take a quick moment to share with you. Megan had brought it to our attention that Muktananda had a different way of translating this text, and so I pulled that out, and I know it's really little, and I apologize, technical difficulties. I'm going to read it for you. But Muktananda said, by the conquest of delusion, the supreme realization is attained. That's just another way of looking at the same thing. Don't be fooled by Maya, buying into limited powers. That's Lakshman Jew's translation. Or, as Muktananda says, conquer Maya, conquer delusion in order to really attain what you want from your practice. And so we've been sort of going up the 8 limbs of yoga, so to speak, talking about asana and pranayama. I'm going to skip ahead here. Pranayama, and that's where we left off last week, where we were talking about the supreme pranayama is actually going beyond just an experience of your inhale or your exhale. And so with that, we're going to open the door up to the second or third to last portion of the sutra, which starts to talk about Pratyahara. And Pratyahara is sort of a focusing and a transcending of the senses. And this is described in green. Anandama, would you like to read this section? I know you're actually sort of a Pratyahara enthusiast. So You're welcome to unmute yourself and give it a shot, and we'll start here.
Next is the yogic practice of Pratyahara. In the practice of Pratyahara, you are to divert your consciousness of mind from the senses towards your own self. For such a yogi, however, this is not really Pratyahara. For him, Pratyahara is something else. At this point, the yogi has the apprehension of falling again into worldly consciousness. Here, he must wholeheartedly maintain his awareness and avoid its becoming weaker. He must not mind the sounds that he is experiencing, whether they be good, bad, furious, frightening, or threatening. Then, by remaining fully aware, he will gain entry into the supreme state of consciousness. This is called Pratyahara. It cuts down and chops to pieces the bondage of ignorance, Dhyana.
Fantastic. So we'll take a moment to breathe with that. There's a lot of different learning styles. Some of us need to reread that a little on our own. Anandama, take your time. If you'd like to offer like the first comment or reflection on that, you're welcome to.
I just want to reread it one more time here.
Yeah, and that is, everybody feel free. And I will see if I can get the whole thing on one page. There we go.
Well, I'm a little confused as to what at this point means. So when you have the withdrawal of senses, that's when the apprehension of falling into worldly consciousness happens?
At this point, I think that's taking up from the pranayama that he described earlier. It's like once you've been able to maintain your awareness through the, I think it was shukshmatita, the subtlest states of pranayama, then this opening of surrendering your senses is available to you, is my interpretation. Does that help?
Yes.
Because they talked about in this previous section in pranayama how when your breath gets really subtle, you sort of like, and your breath gets really subtle, you sort of feel like you're going to lose your focus. You're like, I don't have anything to focus on anymore. Like the breath is no longer tactile. It's not going in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds. I'm going to lose it. It says everybody goes through that. I don't know. Raise your hand. Does anybody have do you feel like you've experienced that before when you're trying to watch your breath, but it's like it either stops or gets so subtle? Yeah, I've heard Babaji ask, or people ask Babaji that numerous times, like, my breath stopped. What do I do? So it's like we feel like we're going to lose our focus. But the amazing part is, if you can just maintain the level of awareness you brought, getting to that point, this is what the text was telling us. If you can just stay steady, not do any more or any less, just stay steady, you won't fall. They say you won't fall from that awareness. It's just sort of like this in-between stage you have to pass through. And so that's what he's saying, this falling again, you won't fall again into worldly consciousness.
So it makes me have a fun question for everyone. Whether or not you have had the experience of like the breath being that subtle, something that might be more common that we've experienced in some form is like that moment where it's like your mind gets really quiet or your heart gets really open or you can feel Shakti flowing through you, something that we might want to accept, and be like, ooh, yay, here it is, and I know for me in that moment, it's like I almost feel that little bit of grasping, right? Where it's like, oh, I want more of this, or I want to hold on to it forever. And it seems similar, where it's like when the senses want to start to draw you back in and you have to sort of like let go of that grasping. And I see some people sort of nodding a little bit. I'm curious what you do in that situation, that moment of maybe surrender or coming back to the breath. Does anyone have any secret tools?
Specifically in the moment where you feel like you're slipping?
Like well, for me, it's like that moment of like, oh, my heart's so open, like I want it to keep opening, or my mind's so calm, like I just want to rest here forever. And then, of course, that thought has like dissolved the moment.
Yeah,
So just almost like letting go of the wanting to hold on.
Mm. Does that resonate with anyone? Any comments?
I feel like that happens often. And for me, it really helps to breathe deep into the belly. Like when I feel myself like whoop, going, to pull my attention back into the belly, like that helps me to let it go and like to let go of that like want and grasp.
Nice.
That's really helpful, Jaganmati. I feel like that applies here, right? Where there's like this falling into worldly consciousness, and connecting with the navel can sort of help us with almost, I guess, this next level of pratyahara that is pratyahara for the yogi, according to the sutra.
Yeah, I feel like that navel really resonates with the line, wholeheartedly maintain his awareness. It's like when I think about wholeheartedly, of course, the heart comes up. But to be honest, like that navel feels like, I actually was listening to Swami Rujananda in a satsang tape. I guess we call them tapes for some reason. And he was talking about how your true core is down near the navel, and like at the lowest part of your torso. And so that can resonate with what you were saying. Kona, Bob, did you want to jump in there?
Not that I have a technique, but just from practicing, just continuing to do what you do, continue to do what you do, day after day after day, and the muscles that hold you up get stronger, as Baba always talks about. And then, so if you find yourself, you lose it, it's okay. Just keep doing what you do, and your muscles will get stronger, and your muscles will get stronger, and you don't have to worry about finding a particular technique so much as just keep doing what you're doing. And that's, I think Baba really stresses that a lot, and I certainly find that to be true too.
Yeah, that definitely applies even in the realm, like in the physical realm, where you're like, if you're even trying to build muscle, it's like you have to be used to, like, you have to give it the effort over time principle. You can't reach for strength. You can't be like, I want it to be this way. You have to like do repetitions over time, and that steadiness is what actually generates the strength. Any more comments before I'm going to look at this next sentence. It talks about he must not mind the sounds that he is experiencing, whether they be good, bad, furious, frightening, or threatening. And then if we just look at the footnote from Lakshmanju, he says, basically to summarize the footnote, it should pop up here. It's right here at number 10. He says, you're not like trying to like say, oh, I don't hear that. Push these sounds aside. He says, you should, I'll just read it. When you leave these sounds aside, you should not remain inattentive to them. So you should remain attentive to them. You should hear these sounds and not be afraid of them. When you allow them to frighten you and you become afraid, thinking it may do some harm to my body, or no, I don't want to hear that, then you will come out, and again, you'll be in the worldly field of consciousness. So you should remain inattentive. Oh, shoot. You guys can't see the screen this whole time. I am so sorry. My bad. So you should remain inattentive to these sounds, not shunning them and not giving them any importance. I apologize for not having the screen up at that moment, but I think you guys get the idea. Not hearing them doesn't mean pushing them away. It means surrendering them. Anybody, Asha, you meditate in Chicago. We've all heard on the Rudios, the Swami Rujananda satsang recordings, for those of you who don't know what a Rudio is, the ambulances going by and the loud sounds of the highway. How do you work with this sort of like surrendering those ambient sounds that might come up when you're, you know, meditating or even teaching? Does that come up for you in your teaching environment a lot? Maybe it doesn't.
I'm laughing because I just taught a class, a yoga class right before this, a yoga and meditation class. And yes, there are often ambulances and fire trucks and people right outside the window that are talking loudly or what have you. And
Right, that's almost harder than an ambulance. Yeah.
yeah. Now, of course, we're teaching virtually, so I don't know how much of that they can hear. I think they can hear less of that now. More than anything, it's reminding students, you know, it does still affect me, of course, but more than anything, it's reminding students to kind of bring their focus back to the moment. But I think, like with anything, I feel that initial reaction of it, like, you know, kind of a tensing up sometimes. And then it is like that, okay, soften into it, you know, soften into yourself, you know, and redirect and go on. Because I think there is that, you know, that initial, fight or flight, right? When you hear an emergent sound, that sinks in. But actually, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking of a less, well, I don't know if it's less extreme, but a moment in my practice where I did realize I was able to kind of know things were going on, but not fall into them. And it was when I went to a family gathering, and I'm actually used to being in a very small family, but this was a very large family gathering, and they were the type of family that do kind of their own thing, but it's loud and it's in the same room, and you know, and I had brought a book to read, and I was reading that book, and after a while I realized that, you know, it was like all this stuff was going on and it didn't bother me, even though in the past it normally would have. Like, I'm very sensitive to, you know, everything, sounds and energies, you know, but it was this moment where I'm like, it didn't matter, you know, that all this was happening. And yeah, so I guess, I don't know if that answered your question, but I definitely work with Pratyahara.
Nice. So did that family gathering, that's just sort of like, that's just something that just happened sort of spontaneously, you just sort of separated from it in that setting, and then you remember it as this like glimpse of what's possible?
Yeah, I really do, because I'm not a person to like large gatherings either. So I was a bit, you know, just anxious about being there, and it wasn't really my favorite place to be, you know. So it was a spontaneous moment where I was reading, and it's like, oh my goodness, like I was able to just be, and I realized that was my meditation practice that had that effect.
Cool. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Sure.
And while you were talking, Christy's hand went up. Maybe she wants to continue that conversation or have a new idea. So your mic will come through us, and go ahead.
Okay. What Asha's comment made me think of is that often when I heard this, I actually thought more not about something so specific like during meditation, but like Asha said, during my day, that what I really need to surrender is the actual things that are external coming at me during my day, like just normal karma that comes up. I have a job, I have coworkers I have to talk to, stuff like that. And how I'm relating to this sutra is that I can't just, Baba says this all the time, that he wanted to go sit in a cave and everybody told him he wasn't allowed to. I think that way all the time, that sometimes I'm like, I think I'd be a better meditator if I just quit my job and focused on meditation all the time. But really, we're such worldly yogis that it's more important to do my practice while also fulfilling my karma. So I think lots of us home yogis, now I'm not a home yogi anymore, can relate to this quite strongly.
Yeah, thanks for broadening the scope of that for us. Makes a lot of sense. Because essentially, and I think anyone could raise their hand on this one, you know, essentially, well, it's almost like you look at it like, I had this metaphor from a few weeks or maybe a month ago. If you want to become a better archer, you have to like set targets, shoot at them, and then move the targets further, and then shoot at those. Try becoming a better archer without any targets to shoot at. You know, it's like try becoming a better meditator without anything to surrender. That's a very odd concept, but we don't really call, you know, we're all like, no, I'd be a great meditator if I had nothing to surrender. It's like, I don't know, maybe. It's like saying I'd be a great archer if I didn't have any targets to miss. Yeah, Radharani.
So when I was reading this, I was reading this part of the sutra in a different way. You know how
Sure.
the comment before when we were talking last 2 weeks ago about the pranayama, at the end of that, it talks about the divine sounds that you can hear during meditation. That's like at the very end of the last week. So I was kind of like relating these sounds to those sounds. Maybe it's not the right, but I was also reading Swami Muktananda's book, Play of Consciousness, where he relates a lot of his experiences. Like really, it's an account of his amazing experiences after getting Shaktipat from Nityananda. And one of the things he goes through is this sounds when he's in deep meditation. So it describes a little bit what this sutra is describing, first with the asanas, and then with the breathing, and then also this divine sounds that he hears during meditation. And that's like was alluded last time when he says he experiences tremendous divine sounds rushing into his mind when he's doing pranayama. That's kind of like the previous paragraph. And he got frightened of those sounds and those experiences. So when I was reading this part when it says, even if you become frightened or you think it was going to be bad to your health, I was thinking of that in the book. He was really frightened of those sounds and those experiences. And then he was able to go through that and then go to the other side of that and, you know, keep you know, getting deeper and deeper into his meditation. And so that's kind of like how I was reading this and I was reading the other book. I kind of related those two things.
Absolutely.
Which I have not had any experience like that. It's just like...
yeah, we could do that little caveat to a lot of the a lot of the things we discussed.
It was interesting to read it here and then to read his experiences of that, those divine sounds and sometimes very scary sounds that he was hearing during meditation.
Thank you so much for like that extra reference point. That's an awesome thing to bring in and sort of shows that like the work that we're doing in our daily practice is setting the stage for the subtle work that has to be done like after the physical practice, right? Because for example, like asana, like when we're able to do asana practice, it sets the stage to be able to work within our breath. Working within your breath sets the stage to be able to work within your senses in your mind. Working with your senses in your mind sets the stage for being able to work, like you were saying, like with these even more subtle aspects. But it keeps being, like Babaji says, 101 ways to surrender. You know, it's really this principle that permeates all of these, but at different manifestations. I remember there was a story once near Nityananda made Muktananda go sit in a haunted house that was in India, and everybody who sat in that house ran out like screaming, and he made him sit in it overnight, or he said you can do this as a test, and Muktananda emerged the other side. The next morning he walked back, and Nityananda was like pretty impressed, but I'm sure he heard some frightening sounds in that haunted house. It's a real haunted house. Go figure. Open 365 days a year. Did you? Oh yeah, here we go. Did you have something you wanted to reference? Okay, cool. I'm going to just pop the text back on the screen so we can sort of review it before we move on to the next page. I was pretty impressed with that last line, I will say. Cuts down and chops to pieces the bondage of ignorance. Pretty exciting. thought, very literal and straightforward. Oh, and before we move on, I had one more thing about this. Babaji was just talking about this in Satsang Monday. I tried to get the video queued up, couldn't find the exact quote, apologize. But he was talking about, someone was saying like, I'm having intense physical pain that's making it hard to meditate. You know, and then Baba said, well, you know, you can also like focus on this aspect during just when you have an itch and just watch the battle that ensues inside, you know? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. When we have an itch, I mean, it's this little itch, but it feels like a tremendous inner struggle sometimes to not itch it, you know, and how the mind makes it bigger than it is. So he must not mind the sounds or the itches he's experiencing.
However terrifying.
Yeah, an itch can become terrifying. All right. All right, so moving on, this last part goes pretty quick. So we'll just take a look. They sort of go quickly through the next stages. The next one's being Dhyana, Dharana, and Samadhi. So this is like the top of the tree, so to speak, where we're really getting high up there. And for reading, someone who hasn't read in a while or someone new?
Kara, can you read the screen? Can you see
Kara?
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we'll do Kara for the pink and
Oh,
Kara
Kara.
for the purple.
Okay, cool.
You're right next to each other too.
That's true. On the prior screen. Okay, Carol, go ahead with the pink.
Sorry about that. The next yogic practice is Dhyana. What is the real Dhyana for such a yogi? When these sounds subside and he goes beyond the experience of them, he attains that supreme state of ecstasy, which is ineffable and which only he knows.
In case you're wondering, too great or extreme to be expressed or described in words, ineffable. Oops. Okay, that's just how I roll, sorry.
Thanks.
Okay, so there you go. And then this is actually Dhyana. Sorry to cut you off.
No worries.
Just a moment, reading over it yourselves. Welcome to throw a comment out there. Anything stand out to you? Sometimes I like to look at this through sort of like Einstein's little description of a good theory. He says a good formula should be simple, but not too simple. And so sometimes when I look at sutras, I'm like, oh, it's so simple. Then I'm like, oh, what's the not too simple part? There's always like a little something in there. And before I say anything, anyone looking around? Okay. Oh yeah, sure, Anju, go for it.
Hey everybody. For me, like I don't know. I feel like I'm probably saying a lot of the same things sometimes, but I'm kind of like caught up in this like inner experience of just sort of, you know, this inner evolution. And I like that the sutras kind of keep reminding me to kind of trust in the process, and that, you know, these things that come up, it's, you know, this kind of idea of neither accepting or rejecting, and keep working and you're going to get there. Don't worry about where you are. Don't worry too much about where you're going, but let that kind of evolution happen, and you're going to find yourself there. And it's like always hinted at, but never really described, because I think it's probably not really possible to put it into sort of like words that we can grasp at, like regardless of sort of language or culture or those types of things. It's something that like arises in you, and you sort of will know when you're there. And once you reach there, it's probably hard to describe that back outwards to somebody who's on that journey.
Thanks, Anju. That's so helpful. It's like this reminder to just put one foot in front of the other, you know, and the sutra sort of like, and then something scary is going to pop out.
It's
and
true.
if you,
Yeah.
you know, it's like what happens, you almost want to like turn around and be like, oh, I must be going in the wrong direction, you know, or like, oh, that's uncomfortable, I should avoid that, or at least
That's true.
some of us might react that way. So what I gathered from what you were sharing is it's sort of like, okay, keep doing what got me here. You know, this, it's almost like going through the fire. Like I just have to trust this is coming up, because going through it is going to make me a better yogi, instead of like running the other direction, which we might want to do sometimes.
So
Dharma.
true. Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed in this last section, in the one that we just read before, that it talked about the practice of Pratyahara or Dhyana, but then it gave an experience of what it is to this yogi, and the experience, like that state that it described, had this like senses alive, and it just seems to point to that thing that is an experience. It doesn't necessarily have like words and concepts to describe something other than this process. But again, I'm kind of imagining some of these things, or reading them and imagining, because I haven't experienced what they're describing. But I just noticed that there were those sort of two ways. There was the practice, and then there was this experience of a yogi in it. It was interesting distinction.
Yeah, it feels like the yogic tradition always leaves room for the ineffable, always leaves room for the experience, always like says like, but that's not everything. Like it always seems to say like, we always says that the state we're reaching for is cannot be distilled to words, you know. Yeah, so it's really true. Every step of the way, it keeps reminding us of that. Patanjali speaks to this quality. He did in the Yoga Sutras. He says something to the effect of, eventually all mental logic must come to an end in bliss. Following that is comprehension that all is the self, yoga, and then unity. So it seems very similar to this idea of like once you go beyond the logical experience, or to get beyond the logical experience, you know, is a part of the process. Like there's a part of the process when you have to, it almost feels like how Baba always says, like jump off the cliff, but you go up. It's always like we can have all these directions that lead us to the edge, and then the last set of instructions on the map says jump, you know, and you're like, what? Can't they just leave a rope if somebody was there? It's like, no, because you're going to your own experience. No one's been there before in you. You know, there's no rope that you can climb up until you've gone there. In the introduction to this text, Swami Lakshmanju talks about how that experience came to him after so many years. He just says he was meditating one day like any other, and I could probably scroll back and find it, but it'd be, you know, take a while. He said it was just a day like any other. He was doing his practice, and everything just happened all at once. Everything he'd ever read about, everything he'd ever been told, everything he'd ever sought to experience was just like that day it happened. And he says in the text, he goes, and I was so great. And he goes, and I am so sorry that sounds egotistical. He just means like the experience of myself was greater than I'd ever imagined who I could be, you know. And he just talks about it. It was late in his life too. Swami Lakshmanju he knew Swami Muktananda. He actually visited Swami Muktananda about a week before Swami Muktananda left his body, and they were great friends, and they sort of had like that moment before Before Muktananda left his body just like a week later. So it's cool that this text is a part of our tradition, you know.
And Baba and Faith have met Lakshmanji.
Oh yeah, Baba and Faith have met Lakshmanji and everything,
and it looks like maybe Bob has,
Bob
and
Pujari
Pujari.
met
Well,
him.
raise your hand if you've met Lakshmanji before.
Wow, well that's fantastic. Cool.
Was he great?
I would just like, I was young. Baba had taken me with him.
And that's all the story is. Did you guys freeze? Everybody, Bob, you froze young, and you were with Baba, and I think that's the Shakti's saying it's an experience just for you.
A spark of, like there was lightning all around me, but it wasn't making any noise. It was just beautiful light flashing all around me. It was just beautiful. That's all I remember.
Excellent. I'll talk to you about that, Bob, later, because I see about the joke, Bob, is that when you were talking, it cut out, and so all I heard is there was lightning, and that's all I remember. And it just seems perfect. But hey, right on. Hey, Kara, do you want to finish? Oh, and I don't want to jump in. If anybody wants to finalize this section before we wrap it up. Cool. Kara, you want to read the purple for us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now for this yogi, what is the yogic practice known as Dharana? When he holds the consciousness of Lord Shiva in continuity, eternally, without any break, that is Dharana.
Any comments or questions? Yes.
Recently, we were talking about the story where the little boy is holding a cup and is really upset because he doesn't know how to fit the whole ocean in his cup. And a teacher's walking by and sees this boy, you know, who's distraught and says, "Oh, you know, whatever is the matter?" And
I love the ocean so much.
yeah, go ahead.
No.
Whatever is the matter?
Yeah, the kid was just like, he loved the ocean so much. He was like, but how can I fit it all in my cup? I want to bring it home with me.
And then the teacher says, "Oh, well, just throw your cup in the ocean." And so in this
And
quote,
nowadays, it's a little off.
no
But back then,
littering.
there was way less pollution.
Oh, and everything was made out of like clay, so it
Yeah,
just
it was
dissolved.
clay.
But it says when he holds the consciousness of Lord Shiva, and it's almost like, I don't know, getting out of this idea of like us being able to contain it all, but rather like allowing ourselves to immerse in that, you know, eternal, continuous, breakless consciousness.
Throw your cup in the ocean. Because I guess if you have a cup, then your attention's always going to be going back and forth between the ocean and your cup. The ocean and your cup. You know, like your practice and your life. Practice and your work. There's a sense of separation. You know, and the only way to really find that merge, that non-dualistic level of merging is to surrender what it is you think separates you from the divine, right? Just whatever you think that thing is, it's like, oh, if it wasn't for this, if it wasn't for this cup, you know, I would be able to, you know, take this ocean with me. It's like, well, whatever that thing is, I feel like Rudy talks about it in that way where he's like, you surrender whatever comes between you and God. Like whatever you think separates you from that experience, that's what you surrender. So if the kid was distraught about the cup, you throw the cup in the ocean, you know, and you have an experience. And just for the sake of completion, because this yellow really does sort of wrap up the concept of the sutra, we'll finish with just reading this one, and then we'll...
Murali, can you
Murali.
see the text clearly enough to read? Will you read the yellow?
Sure. What is Samadhi for this yogi? When such a yogi experiences the state of universal consciousness of Lord Shiva, not only in his internal state of consciousness of self, but also in the very active life of the universe, this is called real Samadhi.
As a yogi who has a very active life of the universe, Murali, I know you're extremely busy juggling many different aspects. You know, do you relate to this excerpt in the sense of, is your practice most real when it's in the context of your life? You know, or is that, how do you relate to that?
I think I relate to that as more aspirational than anything else. Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like that's kind of the, you know, it's the last thing, sort of the, I guess, it's sort of the pinnacle, right? So if you're able to hold that ultimate state in a very active place, then that's sort of like, you know, you sort of made it at that point. So I figured, I think of that as more something that I would work towards, not something that I currently experience.
Great. It's good, because that was a trick question. I would have, no, I'm just kidding. You don't know what Samadhi is. No. That's awesome. Very insightful, very astute. Thank you for that. You're right. It's the end of the sutra. It's the top of the tree. It does represent a pinnacle of experience.
I do feel like we're able to have glimpses, though, you know, moments of what's possible where you can kind of feel that happening in the day, and it might not last very long, or it might be like, whoa, this doesn't usually feel this smooth, you know, and then it, I don't know, when that happens to me, it's like this reminder of what's possible, and like it makes me want to keep working harder so it becomes more sustainable and maybe more frequent. So I'm sure you've experienced a taste of it, Murali.
Yeah, the other day Babaji was saying, he was talking about like people want to really hold on to their small self, and he wasn't saying like in context of anyone in particular, it was just like a sentiment. And he was like, and he looked, he was sitting in his chair and he said, he goes, you mean that self way down there? And I looked where he was pointing.
I did too. I was so
I really
embarrassed.
looked. I was like, oh, he means, oh, whoa, where is he? Oh my gosh.
We haven't talked about this since it happened, so I'm kind of relieved. I thought I was the only one that looked.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like he's actually at the mountaintop and functioning on this deck at the same time. And I wasn't, but that is definitely represents a lifetime of achievement, more than a lifetime of work. But he really said it like way down there. So funny. Because the Shambhavu Paya represents being at the top of the mountain, having the perspective of a mountaintop while actually being in your life. In the Anavu Paya, where we're talking about, and this is sort of where the sutra concludes, and it talks about, I think that may be the next sutra. It basically just talks about how you have to work up to that. You got to work through base camp. You got to hike up the mountain. You got to arrive there. And at the beginning of the sutra, it talked about how all of the powers that we are seeking, and powers can be all the horizontal solutions that you're seeking. The text tells us, not me saying this, arrive when you arrive. And so if you find yourself reaching it horizontally for that solution, you can be sure, as the sutra begins, that's a sign you're caught in illusion. Like, that's the giveaway. It's really hard to know you're caught in illusion. It's so persuasive. But when you find yourself reaching horizontally for the solution, that's the red flag. And the idea is, as Swami Rajananda always told us, is that a real yogi doesn't need anything. What they need comes to them, because what you need to grow comes to you, So the red flag is the reach. You find yourself reaching, pushing or pulling, accepting and rejecting. That's the sign to practice. With that, let's finish our class together with some meditation. Feel free to wiggle around, move around a little bit. Adjust your seat. My favorite part of class, because it really just puts everything, it's synthesis. This is the Shavasana of yoga class, right? Every yoga class has Shavasana. Philosophy class has meditation.
Our stretches were just in our mind today.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think our subtle body stretch. I feel it in my heart. Like, I feel like there's more space in there. Go ahead and swallow. Where we can hold a lot of tension there throughout our day, just talking. And try to give equal attention to your inhale and your exhale. There's a tendency to favor the inhale because it's that grasping of awareness where you really feel like, I got it. But just let the inhale come to you without too much grasping. And then let yourself really feel and focus on the exhale, because that's a really great moment to feel the releasing of grasping, all the way down to that moment of stillness at the bottom of your exhale. Focus on your breath as a flowing experience, not as just an inhale or just an exhale. But try to experience the endless flowing nature of it. Let it be. Let it flow. If the flow becomes a little slower than you're used to, that space, let that happen. Be steady. Feel your body. Feel the shell of your body. Allow the room and the space you're in to also just be a mere shell. A shell within a shell. Let your attention sink inside. Don't worry if the breath becomes faint. Allow it to move at its own pace. Be comfortable with the stillness between breaths. Namaste, everyone. There's that little audio mishap. I was going through this.
Good to see everybody. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for making this program as fruitful as it is. It's a real product of our depth as a sangha. It's really fascinating and empowering, so thank you.
Jai Jai Hanuman, Jai Jai Sri Dharana.
Aloha.
Jai Jai Hanuman, Jai Jai Sri Dharana. Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Jai Jai Hanuman, Jai Jai Sitaram.
You are here.
Jai Jai Hanuman, Jai Jai Sitaram. Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram.
Girl, now it's like your weekend. What are you
Jai
going to do
Jai
without
Shri
yoga
Ram
training till
Sitaram, Jai
Tuesday?
Jai Shri Ram Sitaram.
I'll like talk about it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so glad
Jai
you could
Jai
come.
Hanuman, Jai Jai Sitaram. Jai Jai 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 Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Shri Ram Sitaram, Jai Jai Shri Ram Sitaram. Jai Jai